In the heart of a forgotten port city in northeastern Brazil, there stands a house that the sea has never relinquished. It is a structure of stone and wood, built during colonial times, yet it holds a secret that predates its own walls, a secret pulled from the depths. This city was once a nexus of trade, a place where fortunes were made and lost on the whims of the tide. Its streets, paved with stones worn smooth by centuries of footfalls, wind between buildings that have seen empires rise and fall. But among them, one house is different. Locals speak of it in hushed tones, with a mix of fear and reverence. They call it the House of the Lost Mast. The story begins in the early 18th century with a wealthy merchant named He envisioned a grand residence, testament to his success, overlooking the very ocean that had granted him his wealth. Construction was well underway when a powerful storm ravaged the coast, leaving a trail of wreckage in its wake. As the waters calmed, a colossal mast, torn from an unknown ship, washed ashore. It was ancient, carved from a dark, unfamiliar wood, and bore strange markings that no one could decipher. Sebastian, a man known for his ambition and perhaps his arrogance, saw it not as debris, but as a gift from the sea. He ordered his men to retrieve the mast, ignoring the warnings of the local fishermen who believed some things that come from the ocean should be returned to it. He decided this colossal piece of timber would become the central support beam of his new home, the very spine of the building. The task was monumental. Dozens of men struggled to haul the waterlogged timber from the beach through the winding streets and to the construction site. As they hoisted it into place, a strange, deep groan echoed from the wood, as if it were protesting its new, dry prison. The workers felt a sudden chill, a sense of unease that settled over the site like the coastal fog. But Sebastian was pleased. The mast was in place, a trophy from the sea, now holding up the roof of his domain. The first signs were subtle, almost imperceptible. A faint, persistent scent of salt water and damp would begin to permeate the house, a smell that no amount of airing out could disperse. The air inside grew heavy, thick, carrying the kind of oppressive humidity you only feel just before a storm breaks over the open ocean. At first, the family dismissed it as the quirks of a new house built so close to the water. But then came the sounds. At night, when the city was quiet, a low creaking would begin. Not the sound of a house settling, but the rhythmic groan of a ship's hull straining against the waves. Sometimes, a faint, mournful whistle would drift through the corridors, like the wind catching in the rigging of a ghost ship. Servants would whisper of hearing water dripping in rooms where there were no pipes, or the soft, wet slap of bare feet on the wooden floors. The atmosphere within the house began to change, to curdle. Sunlight seemed to struggle to penetrate the windows, and the shadows in the corners of rooms grew longer, darker than they should have. A profound melancholy settled over the family. Laughter became rare, replaced by a quiet, watchful tension. They started to feel as if they were not residents, but intruders in a space that had its own memories, its own sorrows. Soon, the feeling of being watched became undeniable. Family members would catch fleeting movements in their peripheral vision, shadow shifting in an empty hallway, a curtain stirring in a room with no breeze. Sebastio's wife claimed to see the reflection of a gaunt, soaked figure in the glass panes at night, a face that would vanish the moment she turned. They began to avoid the main hall, where the great mast stood, feeling a cold, intense presence emanating from the ancient wood. The house seemed to be remembering its past life. On stormy nights, the phenomena would escalate. The entire structure would sway gently, not from the wind, but with a slow, rocking motion, like a vessel on a calm sea. The sounds of the ocean would grow louder, the crash of waves and cries of gulls echoing from within the walls, even when the sea outside was perfectly still. It was as if the house itself believed it was still adrift, lost in an endless, watery expanse. Objects would move on their own. A sailor's knot would mysteriously appear in a length of rope left in the study. A collection of shells on a mantelpiece would be found rearranged, spelling out unreadable, watery symbols. Small pools of salt water would materialize on the floorboards in the main hall, right beneath the mast, with no earthly explanation for their origin. The house was no longer just haunted. It was actively trying to communicate, or perhaps to reclaim something. The silence in the house became its most terrifying feature. It wasn't an absence of noise, but a presence, a heavy, listening silence, filled with anticipation. It was the silence of the deep ocean, where unseen things drift in the dark. The family lived in a state of constant, low-level dread, always waiting for the next whisper, the next movement, the next sign that they were not alone. They had become crew on a ship that was forever anchored in the earth, but whose soul was still lost at sea. One moonless night, the final event occurred. Sebastio was awoken by a deafening sound, not a creak or a groan, but the splintering crack of a massive tree breaking in a storm. He rushed to the main hall. The entire house was filled with the roar of a phantom ocean and the frantic shouts of a dying crew. Staring up at the mast, he saw it weeping, a dark, tar-like sap that smelled of decay and the abyss. And carved into the wood, where there had been no carvings before, were the outlines of dozens of faces, their mouths open in silent screams. He fled the house that night and never returned. The house has stood empty for generations now. No one has dared to live in it since. Some say that on foggy nights, you can still hear the groaning of the mast, still see the dim light of a lantern swinging in an upper window. The story is a warning, passed down through the ages in that old port city. A warning that you can take something from the sea, but you can never truly take the sea out of it. The house does not belong to the land. It belongs to whatever followed that mast from the dark, cold depths, and it is still waiting.